Well, good evening. Glad everybody's made it out. Tonight we're going to pick up where we left off last time, which is in Greece. Now, if you'll remember, we've been through the early years of Greece. We've been through the golden age of Greece. And we've made it through the Peloponnesian Wars. We've been through the great thinkers of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. And now comes a time where Greece has fallen away in power. And a man by the name of Philip II walks onto the stage. Now, Philip II is the king of Macedon, soon to be known as Macedonia. Now, he comes to power in 359 BC, and in 338 BC, he starts his campaign to conquer Greece. Now, in 338, he starts his conquering. By 336, he has conquered the nation of Greece, and he creates what's known as the League of Corinth. Now, this is similar in nature to what Athens did. Its purpose was to rout Persia out of Greek lands. But the king of Macedon had no pretense. He's coming in as king. Athens did not do that, so he's coming in as the ruler. Now, in 336 BC, he's ruling everything. He's been ruler, and he is assassinated. And up to the stage, or up to his throne, marches his son by the name of Alexander. Now, Alexander is 20 whenever he takes the throne. So he's a very young man. And to tell you a little bit about Alexander's attitude, every time his father would go to war and would win, his friends would come in and say, "Your dad's won another victory." And Alexander would not be excited. In fact, he was pretty bummed about that. And when asked, "Why are you so upset or why are you not excited that your father won?" he said, "The reason is the more my father wins, the less of the world there is for me to take." That's pretty ambitious for a teenager. At the age of 16, 17, 18, while his father is conquering Greece, he already has world domination on his mind. So he's not excited. But at the age of 20, in 336 BC, he begins his campaign to take over the world. And he does so. In 333 BC, he begins his march on Persia. Let's get there. And he defeats Darius, king of Persia, in one of the earliest battles. Doesn't kill him. It doesn't defeat the entire Persian army, but routes him back to his homelands. And so he continues on. Now, he continues marching south toward Egypt, and he goes through Tyre and Gaza. Now, Alexander has a different approach to conquering the lands. What he does when he approaches an upcoming city, he gives them an ultimatum. He says, either you let me go through and don't molest my army, don't mess with my supply lines, you let us go through, we'll leave you alone. Or we'll level your city. One of the two options. Most of the places he comes to says, sure, go on through, and lets them by. Tyre and Gaza do not. And so these are two of the first cities to actually be leveled by Alexander in his conquest. Now, while he is taking on the city of Gaza, he sends emissaries or ambassadors on to Jerusalem. And he says to the king of Jerusalem or to the leaders of Jerusalem and says, are you going to let us pass or not? Well, Jerusalem has been under the ruler of Persia for this entire time. They've been paying tribute. That has been the king. So they continue to follow the king of their land. They say, we're going to stick with Persia because that's the king. And so Alexander says, okay, we're going to come and destroy you too. Now, Josephus writes a very vivid description of this encounter. And so I'm going to take time to actually read Josephus tonight, his entire encounter with the city of Jerusalem, because there's a lot of good detail in there that I don't want to misquote or misrepresent. So I'm going to read it straight from him. So this is what it says. This is the words of Josephus. Now Alexander, when he had taken Gaza, made haste to go up to Jerusalem. And Jaddua the high priest, when he had heard that, was in agony and under terror, as not knowing how he should meet the Macedonians, since the king was displeased at his foregoing disobedience. He therefore ordained that the people should make supplications and should join with him in offering sacrifice to God, whom he besought to protect that nation and to deliver them from the perils that were coming upon them. Whereupon God warned him in a dream, when he came upon him after he had offered sacrifice, that he should take courage and adorn the city and open the gates, that the rest should appear in white garments, but that he and the priest should meet the king in habits proper to their order. without the dread of any ill consequences, which the providence of God would prevent. Upon which, when he arose from his sleep, he greatly rejoiced, and declared to all the warning he had received from God, according to which dream he acted entirely, and so waited for the coming of the king. And when Jaddua understood that Alexander was not far from the city, he went out in procession with the priests and the multitudes of the citizens. The procession was venerable, and the manner of it different from that of any other nation. It reached a place called Sapha, which is name, translated into Greek, signifies a prospect. For you have thence a prospect both of Jerusalem and of the temple. And when the Phoenicians and the Samaritans that followed him thought they should have liberty to plunder the city and torment the high priest to death, which the king's displeasure fairly promised them, the very reverse of it happened. For Alexander, when he saw the multitude at a distance in white garments, while the priest stood clothed with fine linen, and the high priest in purple and scarlet clothing, with his mitre on his head, having the golden plate whereupon the name of God was engraved, he approached by himself and adored that name, and first saluted the high priest. The Jews also did altogether with one voice salute Alexander, and encompass him about. Whereupon the kings of Syria and the rest were surprised at what Alexander had done, and supposed him disordered in his mind. However, Parmenon alone went up to him, and asked him how it came to pass that when all others adored him, he should adore the high priest of the Jews. To whom he replied, I did not adore him, but that God who has honored him with his high priesthood. For I saw this very person in a dream, in this very habit, when I was at Dios in Macedonia, who, when I was considering with myself how I might obtain the dominion of Asia, exhorted me to make no delay, but boldly pass over the sea, for that he would conduct my army and would give me dominion over the Persians. Whence it is that, having seen no other in that habit, and now seeing this person in it, and remembering that vision, and in the exhortation which I had in my dream, I believe that I bring this army under the divine conduct, and shall therewith conquer Darius and destroy the power of the Persians, and that all things will succeed according to what is in my own mind. And when he had said this to Parmenon, and had given the high priest his right hand, the priests ran along by him, and he came into the city. And when he went up into the temple, he offered sacrifice to God, according to the high priest's direction, and magnificently treated both the high priest and the priests. And when the book of Daniel was showed to him, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was that person intended. And as he was then glad, he dismissed the multitude for the present. But the next day he called to them and bid them ask what favors they pleased of him. Whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers, and might pay no tribute on the 7th year. He granted all they desired. And when they asked him that they would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws also, he willingly promised to do hereafter what they desired. Quite a detailed experience with the Jews and Alexander. Now, from that point on, Alexander, well, let me step back. First, let's look at this as a picture perfect. Alexander's marching on the city of Jerusalem. And as he's approaching the city, what does he see? He sees a multitude in white. All the people have come out of their protection. He's coming to destroy them, and they know that. The entire city has come out to greet him. There in front are the men in white robes, and in the middle is a man standing in purple with a gold breastplate, obviously the leader. And behind him they call it the prospect. Behind that multitude, you see the city of God. And on the hill you see the temple. Now that's quite an impressive view for a leader, for anybody. And he walks up to this. Now the army's behind him, they're ready to pillage and loot. And what does Alexander do? He walks up and shakes the high priest's hand and says, "Hi, how are you doing? I like your shirt." It baffles the army completely. They don't know what to think of it. They think he's gone crazy. The greatest man, the greatest warrior, the greatest leader the world has seen up until this point is paying homage to God. That right there tells you something about the man of Alexander. He says, this man, not necessarily the man in the robe, but the guy he's representing, told me I was going to have success. And to date, I've always had success. And, I mean, it's not deja vu. I saw this man in my mind. And what does Alexander do? He pays homage not only to the priests, but he pays homage to the Jews. He says, you're tax-free every 7 years. You can do your own laws. And he held them in high esteem. And as long as Alexander was on the throne, the Jews were well-respected peoples. He held to that truth. Now, Alexander did not stay long in Jerusalem. He moved on, and he moved south. He went on to Egypt. Now, if you remember when we studied Egypt, whenever Alexander took that nation, they didn't put up a fight. They say, yay, new king, you get to be Pharaoh. And handed the keys of the kingdom over to him. Now, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria. Now, we're all familiar with that name. Now, that city was the most modern city of the time. It boasted the first lighthouse ever to be created. It's one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world that we don't have any idea what it looked like, but it did exist at a time there in Alexandria. Then you had the libraries of Alexandria. One of the things that the Greeks did as the Greek Empire grew, it encouraged all of its inhabitants to bring us your documents, bring us your scrolls, bring us your texts, and let's translate them into Greek. And so, because we wanted, knowledge is power to the Greeks. So they wanted to learn from all of these peoples. So everybody came to Alexandria. The Jews came to Alexandria. Whenever you look at the ancient text of our Bible that's in your pews, it was translated out of the Greek from this time period. Because this is when everything was translated from the Hebrew or the Aramaic back into Greek. That was during this time period. So Alexandria was the hub, the place to be during that time. And it continued to be even long after Alexander died. Now, as he finished with Alexandria, Alexander the Great did not like to stay put very long. He started moving east. Now, he takes Babylon, and he takes on the city of Ur. He takes out Susa. He goes on, and he makes it to a city of Bactra, which is the far eastern region of the Persian Empire. And his army has been traveling with him for about 10 years now. And they're tired. They want to go home. And they finally reach the end of Persia. And they say, finally, we did everything he set out to do. And Alexander says, you see those eastern hills? I hear there's another country on that side. It's called India. And we're going to go take that country too. And so he begins his march on India. And he makes it into India. Now, the army says, no, we're not doing this again. And they say, we're going home. And they mutiny against Alexander. And he says, okay, fine, we're going home. And he comes back and he stops in Babylon. And that's where his story ends. But I want you to think about this. Alexander, to my recollection, to my research, never faced defeat. He won every place he set foot on. He made the Greek Empire the largest empire in the world, and it never got any bigger than that. It stayed that large. But he never suffered defeat. God was true to his promise. He said, I will give you success in taking the Persians. God did not say he would take success in taking India. So whether God stopped him by mutinying his men, or whether the men just got tired and gave up on him, I don't know. But God did exactly what he set out to do, and he took over Persia. Now, Alexander comes all the way back to Babylon. He takes up residence in the temple of Nebuchadnezzar, or the palace of Nebuchadnezzar. And it's in this place that Alexander dies. History records him having contracted a fever for 10 days, then dying. Kind of an anticlimactic death for such a very noble person, or a very powerful person. Whether he was poisoned, whether he died of natural causes, we don't know. But we know he did not die in battle, he died in his bed. But he was only 33. Very young man. Alexander the Great conquered the world in 13 years. That's quite an accomplishment. Now, from there, he did not have any offspring that lived to the adulthood. He had 2 sons that we know of, neither of which survived. Neither did their wives or his wives. So his empire went to his 4 generals. Now, those generals split the nation in 4 ways. So you have Lysimachus, who took Thrace and Asia. That's northern Turkey, northwestern Turkey. Then you have Cassander, who took Macedonia and Greece, so the Greece proper. Then Ptolemy I took Egypt, Palestine, Sicilia, Petra, and Cyprus. And Seleucus took Mesopotamia, the Levant, Persia, and India. So if you look at this on a map, So you have Seleucus, who took the major portions of this, all of Persia. They are the Seleucids. That's what became the Seleucid kingdom. Ptolemy took Egypt, as well as some of the smaller pieces here. This is where Lysimachus took, and this is Cassander. So they split it up 4 ways. As you can see on the map, the 2 largest kingdoms that came out of that were the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. So those are the 2 bigger empires. And they are the ones that ended up shaping the way Israel formed over the next several hundred years. The Ptolemies and the Seleucids continue to fight over the Levant, which is the Israel area. And you can see that right here. It's kind of, go back one. If you look at that, you've got a purple surrounding the yellow. You can always see they're kind of fighting over that one area. They never could agree on who got it. Now these generals, these 4 generals and their successors, continued to battle over this land for the next 200 years. They never made Greece any larger than it was when Alexander left. They didn't have conquest on it anymore other than conquering each other's lands. But these kingdoms did continue the trend of spreading Greek cultures, spreading the Greek way. The term is Hellenization. That was what we call it today. But spreading the Greek way. And they did that well. Now, as we went through history in Israel, I want to bring this person up to light. It was about in 215 BC to 164 BC, a man by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV, took the kingdom of the Seleucids, and he is the king over Jerusalem, over Israel at this time. Now, he is a man, this is what he's known for. He is the one that forbade the practice of the Jewish religion. He's the one that stopped the Jews from practicing Judaism. Now, he's the one that set up an altar to Zeus in the Holy of Holies. He's the one that sacrificed a pig on the altar of God. He's the one that forbade the circumcision of boys. He's the one that would butcher you if you just defied him. He's the one that, no was not an answer. No was immediate death. You didn't tell this man no. You either did it his way or you died. This was Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, he ruled for a time there in Jerusalem. Well, he wasn't in Jerusalem. That was just one of his outlying lands. But this was quite a man. You know, we think we've heard it all. This guy's even worse. You know, of any of the rulers that I've researched thus far, this guy is the worst that you've heard of. Now, during this time, there is another man that we've heard of. Now, his name is Judas Maccabees. Now, you've heard of the name. In the Apocrypha, which is the 14 books of the Bible that are no longer in the Bible, they were the index, they were kind of part of the Bible but not considered canon. There are 2 books in that Apocrypha that is 1st and 2nd Maccabees. It is the history tellings of Judas Maccabees and his brothers. Now, they led a revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes. They are the ones that fought against it and fought against the successive rulers after him that trying to defy the Hellenistic rulers of Jerusalem. Now, they succeeded. It was against amazing odds that these Jews, the Maccabees and their associates, would fight enormous armies with small armies. And they would win battle after battle after battle and rout all of the Greeks away. And sometimes they're routing the Jews away because a lot of the Jews, whenever you're faced with death, they would eat pig. they would do what Antiochus Epiphanes was demanding of them because they had to. Otherwise, they would die. And so the Maccabean revolt was not only against the Greeks, but everybody who had bowed to the Greek rule. Now, then that's more or less Maccabees 1 and 2 in a very short amount of time. That is the synopsis. But it's a really interesting read. And I tell you why in a little bit, but I would highly recommend you read these. These books, I don't profess them to be biblical. I treat this just like I do Josephus. It's a historical reference point, and it's an important one. So I would recommend you read those. Find yourself a copy of it and read them. They're really, actually a fun read, terrifying, but fun at the same time. Now, one of the other things that happened during the Maccabean revolt is the fact that they purified the temple. Went the wrong direction. They purified the temple. They took back Jerusalem. They purified the temple. And during that purification ceremony, they had to burn the candles as a feast of lights, right? Or the festival of lights. Now, they only had 1 day's worth of oil because it was during the year of the Jubilee. It was 7 years. And it was also a famine in the land. They didn't have much. They had 1 day's worth of oil, and it needed to last 8 days. That oil lasted 8 days. And that's where you get Hanukkah from. So it is from the Maccabean revolt. Hanukkah starts on Sunday, so happy Hanukkah, folks. Now you know where it came from. It is during the Maccabean revolt, where God supplied the oil to last throughout this purification ceremony. And so now we have that holiday. It's called the Feast of, the Feast of Dedication, or the Festival of Lights, or Hanukkah. It depends on which translation or era you're in as to what it's called. Now, there's a few other things to note during this time frame, and for other people. Now, Aristotle. Now, I talked about him last time. Aristotle was the great philosopher, the student of Plato, who's a student of Socrates, so a master theologian. And remember what the Greeks believed, that the Greek way is the way, the best way. The Greek religion is the best religion. The Greek language is the best language. Greeks know it all and believe it all, and they just are the best. And Aristotle was this tutor of Alexander the Great. He's the one that put it into Alexander's head that the Greek way is the best way. And Alexander took that philosophy to the world. And he did it well. Follow it this way. As he's coming through, is what we've discussed tonight. He's coming through your land. He's saying, I won't bother you if you won't bother me. We're going to go through. And he lets go through. Just by doing that, he's now become a semi-alliance with him. Now he tells the folks as he's going by, look, we're going to be coming here a lot. So if we'll trade with you, but we only speak Greek. So if you want to trade with us, you got to speak Greek too. So this Greek language was spread. As he made it down to the city of Alexandria, he told the scholars, bring all of your texts to us and translate them into Greek. What happened to those texts? Well, once they were translated, they went back to Jerusalem in Greek. So now what were they studying in? In Greek. So now you've got the Greek language spoken, you've got the Greek language written. Greek is already predominant in here. Ptolemy's, the King Ptolemy's, whenever he took this further, he actually did it the best of the three nations, or the four nations. He did it the best because he so integrated the Greek way of life into his dominion, which was Egypt primarily, that the Egyptians forgot who they were. The Egyptians forgot how to read their own hieroglyphs. They forgot their gods. He so ingrained Greek culture into the Egyptian culture that they became one, and primarily Greek. Greek with the Greek leading. He did it well. Antiochus Epiphanes didn't do it so well. He came in with a blunt instrument and tried to make it his way or death. And it didn't work quite as well, especially when you have men like the Maccabees to take care of that. But this Greek way was spread to the known world. Look at Aristotle. Aristotle dies in 322 BC, a year after Alexander the Great. So he dies after his student. Now, can you imagine Aristotle, a teacher, and looking at his students and seeing his student take his message to the world and make it work? That's got to be a really high point for any teacher. There are some teachers in here that would you have some pride in a student that took what you taught them to the world and apply it? That's an impressive feat. Alexander had to die a very proud man that his philosophy now was around the world. Aristotle is a very important man in history whenever you think of that. That he shaped Greek philosophy and he shaped the way Hellenization worked. So that's a man that you need to keep in mind with how powerful that particular person was. He wasn't just a philosopher, he was a world changer by way of Alexander the Great. Now there's another man during this time frame by the name of Archimedes. Now that's another name that everybody's heard and doesn't really necessarily know what he did. He is a mathematician. One of the best mathematicians the world had seen at this point. He's the one that derived what pi was, Pi. So he is the one, not the inventor of pi, but decided how far out the number goes. I get to 3.14, and that's as far as I can take it. He is the one that derived that. He could tell you what the surface area of a sphere was. He was able to tell you what the volume of a cylinder was. He was the one that derived those formulas. Now, he was also an inventor. He invented the water screw, which was something that would take water vertically up a channel, which is kind of difficult to do in that day and time without hydraulic pumps. He was able to take water up a channel just by using a hydraulic screw. He also invented two things that almost are legendary. It's never been proven that he could do it, but they live in legend because he's the one that did it And there's enough writings of that he did it, not how he did it, but that he did it, that we kind of believe that they existed. One was known as the claw. Now, this device, Archimedes was he was not the inventor of the lever, but he finally understood the mathematics of the lever and how to use it to his advantage. So he used levers and the block and tackle system? No. Is it block and tackle? Okay, thank you. It's a pulley system. Used primarily on ships, sailing ships and so on. It lifts something very heavy. Well, between the use of levers and block and tackle, he was able to develop an arm that would come over the city wall of Syracuse, his hometown, reach down into the harbor, pick up a ship, shake it to pieces, and then sink it underwater. For 212 BC, that's pretty impressive. He also developed something known as the heat ray. Now, this is one that it lives really in legend because nobody knows how he could have done this. But he was able to use highly polished copper shields and be able to focus the sun's energy onto approaching ships. And because of the high intensity of the focus, the ships would burst into flames. The writer of a book known as Archimedes, Archimedes, the father of mathematics, this author wrote, Roman troops were so feared Archimedes' inventions that if the Syracusans so much as dangled a rope over the city wall, the Romans recoiled in terror for fear that Archimedes was sicking one of their other inventions on him. This man was a feared man because of his inventions. He knew how to terrify an army. Now, the Romans were already starting to come into the land. We see them starting to encroach upon Greece. And the Romans, when they finally took the city of Syracuse, they told the army, the generals told the army, you find that man Archimedes. You do not kill him because we want him working for us. But unfortunately, an overambitious soldier assassinated him, and so Archimedes died, one of the greatest mathematicians of all time. And so he's out of the picture. And with him, all the ways of how he actually created his heat ray. But that is Archimedes, one of the other great men of the time. Now, the Romans are starting to take over. This is the late in the time of Greece. Now, in 197 BC, Rome starts to invade Greece. They take over Macedonia, and by 146 BC, Battle of Corinth, where they have taken over all of Greece. Now, this is not over the Grecian Empire, just over Greece proper. But the Greek Empire falls at this point. So Rome has taken possession of Greece, and so ends Greek Empire, and so starts the Roman Empire. This is this time. So now you know everything I know about Greece. But there's a few more things I wanted to end up with here. We're going to go back to Daniel. Now in Daniel, there are several prophecies regarding Greece. Now the first one we've talked about before. It's the statue that Nebuchadnezzar sees. The head of gold is Babylon. The chest of silver is Persia and Media. Then you have the waist, which is Greece. So that is in Daniel 2:39. After that, we move into Daniel 7, verse 6. It describes Greece as a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. And there's some determination, just like in any other interpretation of a vision. It's like, what could all this mean? Well, a leopard is one of the most swift animals on the planet. Alexander took over the world in 13 years. I think that qualifies as pretty swift. He was going to take over the world. The 4 heads and the 4 wings are the 4 generals. 4 heads have different minds, different ways of doing things, and hard to work together. They never thought of Greece as one whole ever again. But the 4 heads are those 4 people. Then you move on to Daniel chapter 8, verse 5 through 8. You have the goat coming from the west. This is the story of the ram who has taken power with the 2 horns. And then the goat comes out of the west and destroys the ram. And then the goat's horn is broken, and out of it springs 4 other horns. There we are back at the same instance of the 4 generals taking over. Now some people say, what's the goat symbolize? A goat is a very agile, very maneuverable animal, hard to stay anywhere. You can't keep it in. You can ask my brother, he's got goats next door, and they've been trying for years to keep them out of their yard. It doesn't happen. It's a very agile, very nimble animal. Then you move on to Daniel 8, verses 9 through 12. Out of one of the 4 horns sprouts another horn, smaller than the rest, but continues to grow. Now this is believed to be Antiochus Epiphanes. If you read the rest of Daniel, read Daniel chapter 11, verse 1 through 35, This is detailing the persecution of the Jews. If you read Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, it's almost a parallel to Daniel 11 of what Antiochus Epiphanes did and what was prophesied in Daniel 11. And that's one thing, that's why I tell you to read something like Maccabees, because some of the prophecies make sense. Some people are still looking for Daniel 11 to happen. It happened. It's there. You just have to know where to look. Now, as we look at all of this and kind of take it all in, this is what I want to end you with. Go back to Josephus' story of how Alexander came to Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem, as he walks into the city, he pays homage to God, he offers sacrifices, and he brings the book of Daniel to him. They bring it to him, and he reads his story. Alexander gets to read the book, and he sees this ram coming out of the west, and he sees it succeed, and he takes the Persians. And that's all Josephus tells you. But what do we know about the Greeks? Knowledge is power. I have no doubt Alexander kept reading. What did he read? This will not fall to his posterity. Alexander knew that this kingdom wasn't going to be his for very long. Maybe that's why he didn't show any fear. Maybe that's why he moved so fast, because he knew he was going to be able to take the world, but it wasn't going to go to his people anyway. He had nothing to look forward to. So he had nothing to protect himself for. Maybe. Now on the other side of that book, the man showing him the book, what does he see? Jaddua, the high priest. Think of it from his perspective. Jaddua is looking at a man in a 200-year-old prophecy. He sees the goat standing across from him. And he sees Daniel was right 200 years ago. And that's impressive enough. But what does Jaddua also see? He sees Daniel 9 and 10 and 11. He sees what his people are going to go through. And if this part came true, this part's going to come true. The terror that the Jews are going to face, the hardships, the destruction. That had to be hard for Jaddua to take. Because sometimes we all often think about the future and think, oh, that'll never happen. I mean, it can't happen that way. It's probably just, it's here. It's happening now. Jaddua had no choice but to take it as face value now. We live today in the middle of a prophecy. Our prophecy was the Lord would come, He would die, He would rise again. Hardships will fall on the earth. You read the book of Revelation and your knees start knocking together. It's coming. And we're in the middle of that. So what do? Well, you can stick your head in the sand and do nothing. You can pretend it's never going to happen. You can get yourself ready. It's hard to get ready for something like that. But you're here to prepare the people ahead of you. Dad's prepared me. I'm preparing her. You've got nieces, nephews, grandchildren, children. You need to prepare for the coming of the Lord again. And the hardships that are going to come ahead of that, that's what we have to do. Jaddua did his best. So that's what you have to get ready for. Now, that's all I have for Greece tonight. Next time we get together, we're going to start on Rome. And so that's a huge animal, and I'm not sure where I'm going to cut it up. So I don't know if I'm going to do it in one, it's going to be a really long lesson, or over 3. I don't know yet. But I look forward to getting it for you. That's all I've got for you tonight. Thank y'all.